Peatey, Clay, and Sandy were having a fight. What was it about? I'm not sure. But you know how fights can get, especially the big ones. They get nastier and nastier, and they just keep circling around and around until they're not really about what everybody thought they were about. And pretty soon it's just about what someone said, or what someone heard someone said, or what someone did, or why they did it, or why somebody thought they did it. It hits a point where it just doesn't much matter. It hits a point where the point is, I don't like that person. Those people are no good. Peatey, Clay, and Sandy were having a fight. And yeah, it had become that kind of fight. And on this day, the daily skirmish had moved to the sidewalk in front of the coffee shop. Now why? Why, you might ask? Were these three together at a coffee shop if they didn't like each other? Well, there's a term out there, frenemies. Peatey, Clay, and Sandy moved in the same circle of friends. But once the time to play nice because other people are around had ended, this is what would happen. Or if one of the three would leave the large group, then the other two would start talking them down. But of course they knew this. They knew this about each other. So it was rare for any of them to leave before everyone left. Frenemies, Peatey, Clay, and Sandy were having a fight. But on this day, there was a guy sitting at a table on the sidewalk in front of that coffee shop. He looked like a religious guy, some kind of teacher, because he was wearing this robe. And he heard the trio spitting their bile at each other. You did that because you want me to look bad. You're just an idiot. You just want to steal my friends. And the teacher sighed, and he took a sip of coffee, and he stood up and casually inserted himself into the group. And Peatey, Clay, and Sandy were so shocked they just stopped. I don't know why you're fighting, he said, or how this started, but my guess is you don't either, because this fight sounds really old. The eyes of the trio fell. What we forget about in a fight, he continued, is that the person we're hurting is our sister. The person we're hurting is our brother. Now wait a minute, Peatey said. The teacher raised his hand. It's fine to disagree. Sometimes anger is justified and useful. But when we go beyond that, and we start to hurt our sister, hurt our brother, we have to take this little spot in our heart, and we have to put that person in that little spot and make them less than us, less than human. Which, of course, is a sin against them and against the one who created them. And now all three were watching the teacher in stunned silence. But what we also forget, the teacher said, is as we do this, as we hurt them, hurt their creator, we also destroy a part of ourselves. What do you mean? Clay said. Because, the teacher said, when you destroy your family, you deny that we're all connected. When you make someone less than human, you have to act less than human. You have to wound your own humanity to do it. And when we do that, the teacher said, we lose some of our knowledge of, our sense of, our connection to God. And before long, the teacher and the trio were sitting at a table, and the teacher was telling them about a different kind of life, a life lived in justice, not just in the big sense of who's right and who's wrong, but justice lived for others and within relationships, doing the right thing in relationships, a life lived in mercy, where the focus is forgiveness and compassion in terms of how we relate to each other. A life of walking humbly with God, trying to learn the ways of the Creator by living the way God wants us to live. And it was like the teacher was spreading seed on the soil of the lives of Peatey, Clay, and Sandy, seed that would bear fruit. And bear fruit it did. All three felt a change almost immediately. They came to the place where the teacher taught, and they listened, and they went out with the group when they went out to serve others. They met the teacher at the coffee shop, and they talked, and they asked their questions. And they felt a fire in their spirits they had never quite known before. But Clay could get easily distracted. You know how a heavy rain hits a hard sloped path or road that's really flat except it's going downhill? You know how that hard rain can really hit and then just run in all directions? That's how Clay could be. He really liked the teacher. He really liked what he was learning, but he was a guy who had trouble keeping one direction in life. He would grab at whatever was coming by. And grab he did. And most of that good seed, that fruit that the teacher had brought to him, it didn't get the nourishment it needed and faded away. Sandy lasted a little longer. She was more like, all right, you've ever been at the beach when the hard rain falls? And it's falling really hard, and suddenly the sand gets hard, and the water can start to build up on top of the sand, maybe as high as your ankles, but in 20 minutes, it's all gone. Not a lot of things grow in sand. They dry out. That's kind of how Sandy was. For whatever reason, the stuff the teacher taught her just didn't stick very long. And her fruit faded too. Peatey was different. She held on to what she learned. Her life got richer. Eventually, she was going out and teaching with the teacher's words. Eventually, she brought justice and mercy into the lives of others, and she became more and more acutely aware of her walk with God. Oh, and by the way, one of the things she learned was this didn't make her better than Clay or Sandy. She was just different in this way. Everybody has different gifts. Not everybody can be a surgeon, a carpenter, a mechanic, a teacher. Years passed. Life changed. People got married. People moved away. But there came a time when Clay's daughter was sick. Really, really sick. And he found himself sitting by her hospital bed, trying to remember how to pray. Trying to remember some of the words of the teacher, the words that had brought him comfort years before, words that had helped him to feel God near. But he wasn't having any luck. He'd lost that fruit in his spirit long ago. To say he was surprised when Peatey entered that hospital room and stood on the other side of that bed, to say he was surprised would be a massive understatement. But she came. She listened. They prayed. And Clay felt the warmth in his soul again. It was like he had become a fertile field for the seed that she spread. And that seed took hold in his life. A similar thing happened a year later with Sandy. Her marriage was falling apart. She couldn't seem to stop fighting with her teenage daughter, and she found herself alone in that old coffee shop. Alone, like Clay, trying to remember some of those days with the teacher, some of his words, a crumb of comfort. Peatey had just shown up. She didn't know Sandy was there. She didn't know what was going on in Sandy's life. She had just felt this kind of pull to go to the old place. But when she saw her friend, she walked right over. They embraced, they sat, they talked. And there was healing. And the fruit in Sandy's spirit, long dormant, stirred to life. We're called to be good soil. But of course, some of us are better at this than others. As I said in my story, it's a question of gifts. Gifts are different. We need them to be. Without different gifts, life would not only be boring, life just wouldn't get done. And the truth? Our ability to be good soil even changes as our lives change. When Jesus tells a parable, a story, we really as people want it to be about one thing. And we even see in the Bible at times, Jesus explaining the parables. This is exactly what this parable means, like it's some riddle with just one answer. But my guess is those snippets in the Bible that explain the parables are really the work of the gospel writers. Because the point of a parable, a really good parable, is you can run with the interpretation in multiple directions. And those different directions point to God's truth in multiple ways. And as Jesus tells us this story of a sower and the soil, the point is not to blame the soil when it's bad or congratulate it when it's good. It's just what the soil is. Just like we are just what we are at certain points in life. I know we say that you can become a Christian right like that, make a decision, get baptized, and I guess that's true, but becoming a Christ follower, that's a process. It's not a one and done thing. And sometimes we're rocky soil, sometimes we're hard-headed as asphalt, and sometimes, we are a lot better at that doing the justice, mercy, humble, walking, loving thing that we Christ followers are called to do. And part of it all, I think, is we need a sower. Not just Jesus, but a flesh and blood person who's connected to Jesus, who helps us through. For me, it might be an author like Richard Rohr or Thich Nhat Hanh, or one of you, or a person on our staff, or a member of my family. I need that to follow Jesus. I can't do it alone. And that's true for all of us. And I think Jesus is telling us that here. And something else from this, a God truth. Plant life's incredible. Nothing much grows in the sand, but some things do. Plants find cracks in the sidewalk and they grow. It's just a matter of time. But some kind of plant or moss or lichen will grow in that soil even if it isn't really soil. God's love is like that. Maybe the fruit won't take this time, but eventually it will. By the way, I want to give you a translation that's a little different from a verse we often use. We use this verse, Jesus said, "When I'm raised up, I will gather all people to myself." You know what that really is saying, what the real translation of that line is? Jesus says, "I will drag all people to myself." I'll drag them, rocks and all. When your soil is good, share. Live a life lived in justice, not just in the big sense of who's right and wrong, but justice lived within relationships, doing the right thing in relationships. Live in mercy. Let forgiveness and compassion become the focus of how we treat our sisters and brothers. Live a life of walking humbly with God, trying to learn the ways of the Creator by living as God wants us to live. And when your soil is less than good, find your sower. Come here. Find your sower in those gathered, in a word proclaimed, a prayer lifted, an embrace in bread and wine. Even when we turn away, even when our hearts are like stone, the sower will be there, throwing us just one more seed.